Writing a book is incredibly difficult, but it doesn't matter the amount of data analysis that you do. You can only become better by practicing, actually writing a book. Since so many of you seem to enjoy it whenever I talk about book drama and do these discussion type of videos, I am gonna do another one today. Today I'm gonna be talking about some book drama that happened this year and how that relates to a broader discussion that we can have about AI when it comes to writing books. The short gist of this is that basically there was a guy that started a company that allegedly, we don't know for certain because it's kind of a mystery. He didn't quite make it clear, but it appears that this program stole a bunch of books, over 25,000 titles to be exact, and used these books to train an AI and is now offering a service based on that data. So a lot of writers woke up to this program being announced and they were like, wait a minute, I never gave consent for you to use my book. Why are there spoilers for this manuscript that I worked hard on? And also, how did you even get my manuscript in the first place? Even books that were published less than a month ago were already uploaded onto this massive data set. And the whole point of this program was to compare these books based on word count and analyze them based on the vividness of their language and how often they use passive voice and all of these other factors. So a lot of authors were upset that their books were being used for data without their consent, and people in general were kind of questioning the validity of this kind of program in the first place. This particular situation, I think, provides a grander discussion about AI and where we're heading in the future and what that means for creativity and art, including writing books. But before we get into the tea, I gotta thank today's sponsor, Flexispot. What I love about them is that they aim to have affordable and high quality furniture. So I signed the lease for an apartment and I am furnishing everything from scratch, including setting up my home office space. And when I was looking up what kind of desk to get, I really wanted to get a standing desk. What I really liked about Flexispot's standing desk is that it came at a reasonable price considering all the features that this desk has. Not only can I change the height of the desk, it's also very stable and sturdy. I have never put together any kind of furniture in my life. So if someone like me could do it, that just goes to show you how easy it is to install this desk. It's been super helpful for me because now I get to stand more instead of sitting all the time. I haven't had to deal with any back pain or shoulder aches from hunching. They have a 15-year warranty for their desk and they also have a 30-day window to return it. If you're interested in trying out their products or you want to be like desk twinsies with me, you can use my code with Cindy to get an additional $30 off of orders that are over $500. All you gotta do is click the link in my description below. All right, so let's talk about the situation that occurred. The main player in this whole scenario is a tech bro named Benji Smith. For context, he originally created this word processing program called Shakespeare. This one is a pretty simple and harmless program. What raised eyebrows was when he later developed something else called Prosecraft. This is the newest project that he's made, and the idea behind this actually stemmed from him wanting to write a memoir. And he thought if he could create a program where it would give you this whole rundown of all your favorite novels and provide their word counts and how vivid the language is and the total number of adverbs or the amount of passive sentences that are used, and also analyze the words for the emotional sentiment, like how happy they were or how sad it is. Basically, if the words use more positive or negative connotation in the story, if he could use all of that data and be able to summarize it for you, that would ideally be able to help you become a better writer because you can see what other authors are doing. Maybe like on a surface level, this kind of seems like an interesting idea, but even aside from like whether you could argue whether this is useful or not or how valid it is for you to become a better writer from this method, the biggest concern here is how he found these books in the first place. Because again, these were over 25,000 titles. You know he ain't buying 25,000 books from his own wallet. So where did he get that from? So all of these authors woke up and found out about this. They looked up their novels and they saw it there and they were like, bro, what the fuck? This is truly where authors of any kind of genre really banded together against a common enemy, because everyone was all pissed at this dude for doing something that he really should have thought more about on whether this was okay or not. So some of the tweets include 2 of my novels on this site with analysis of passive voice versus active voice, adverbs, etc. Horrified. This is where AI is a danger to authors. This website has uploaded thousands of novels to mine for linguistics without permission and in breach of copyright. If your novel is on it, email the developer and tell them to take it down. I count 20 Stephen King books, 20 Jodi Picoult books, plus books by tons of other contemporary writers, Lauren Groff, Madeline Miller, Angie Thomas. Just search and they're pretty much in there. Did any of these authors authors/publishers consent to this use of their work. There were all kinds of authors on the site. There were mid-list authors, debut authors, really famous authors like Stephen King, Nora Roberts, Neil Gaiman, Angie Thomas, Terry Pratchett. It goes on and on. People were demanding that he take this program down, and Benji writes a tweet, "Hey everyone, thanks for chiming in here. I'm truly sorry to have hurt you in any way. I'm going to write a longer post today talking about this topic, but in the meantime, please send an email to benji@shakespeare.com with a link to your book, and I'll remove it from the Prosecraft website." People saw that and they were like, wait a minute, so you really didn't get these books without people's permission, and now you're asking people to do the work for you to take it down? Why do we have to go out of the way to prevent you from doing something that you shouldn't have done in the first place? Not only is his request so ludicrous, it also begs to ask, why didn't he do literally anything else? Like, why didn't he get books that were in the public domain already, because we have tons to work from? Or why didn't he just approach a few authors and ask for permission in the first place? All the hard work that you put into is now being reduced to the number of passive sentences that you use or how vivid your language is. In the eyes of tech bros, you are just data, and if you don't want to be data, you have to go out of your way to opt out of doing that. Anyway, so everyone was pissed off at him to the point where even the Authors Guild had to come in and get involved, and then eventually Benji published a statement which is kind of like an apology, but it's written really unnecessarily long in my opinion, which goes to show that this is the second drama video in a row that centers around a white man who is unnecessarily verbose. And listen, every time I make a comment like this, there's always people that are angry in the comments saying, why do you have to point out that he's a white man? Well, I don't know. Why are they always seen at the scene of the crime? Anyway, his essay is way too damn long, but I will post a link in my description if you want to read it fully, and I'll read out loud a few excerpts just to highlight it. First of all, the statement starts off with saying that he will take down the Prosecraft website, but before we get into any kind of apology, we have to read almost 1,000 words of him explaining his whole story and his background and why he did what he did without really touching upon like the impact of it or any reflection on that. So he starts off with saying, "I originally started working on this project more than 10 years ago when I began writing a memoir about a difficult time in my life. It was my first book and I didn't know how many words I should write. I have heard that real books should be about 100,000 words. I searched the internet for more specific guidance, but I didn't find much. So I pulled a few paperbacks off of my own shelves, books by authors I admired, and counted by hand how many words were on the first few pages. Then I counted the total number of pages and multiplied the two numbers to get an estimate. I kept a little spreadsheet and it was precious to me. Precious guidance from authors whose books I adored when I was struggling to tell my own story." Bro, this is just you telling me that you spent all this time procrastinating on writing an actual book. You spent all this time counting by hand how many words were on each page? That makes sense, because we all know that the first step to writing a book is first determining how many words are in most books. It's like how anytime an artist starts a painting, first they have to analyze the average ounces of paint that famous artists use. What's weird to me is that the info that he's talking about, like the word count of a book, is pretty accessible information when you check Goodreads or Amazon. So he could have easily built something that is like much simpler, like a scraper that just scrapes the info of like the top 1,000 best sold books on Amazon or Goodreads, and that would have done the job, and it would have like prevented this whole mess right here. After I published that book, I was so moved by the experience that I started my own company to make tools for authors. I created Shakespeare to be a desktop word processor for storytellers, and I expanded my little spreadsheet into a database. I heard a story on NPR about how Kurt Vonnegut invented an idea about the shape of stories by counting happy and sad words. The University of Vermont Computational Story Lab published research papers about how this technique could show the major plot points and the emotional story arc of the Harry Potter novels, as well as many other books. So I tried it myself and found that I could plot a graph of the emotional ups and downs of any story. I added those new sentiment analysis tools to the Prosecraft website too. When I ran out of books on my own shelves, I looked at the internet for more text that I could analyze, and I used web crawlers to find more books. I wanted to be mindful of the diversity of different stories, so I tried to find books by authors of every race and gender, from every different cultural and political background, writing in every genre and exploring all different kinds of themes. Fiction and nonfiction and philosophy and science and religion and culture and politics. I love how when he says that he's gonna scrape the internet to allegedly, possibly steal these books, he made sure that diversity was a priority here. He's like, no, I'm not just gonna copy from white male authors. I wanna be diverse with this. I'm gonna steal from every race and every gender, because that's true equality. While I'm reading these paragraphs that is obviously put together to show this genuine, harmless curiosity that he has with analyzing all these books, I'm wondering, bro, when are you gonna write your own book at this point? How can you put all of this thought into the variables of creating this data set, and you don't put that depth of thinking into like anything else? And this is why people with STEM degrees are required to take liberal arts classes. So this is where he breaks down some other variables rules that he added into this data set, Prosecraft would show 2 paragraphs from a book, one that was most passive and one that was most vivid. Then it would place the books into percentile rankings based on how vivid, how long, or how passive it was. While I can see how interesting that might be from like a nerdy data standpoint, in terms of creating art and creating stories, there's only so much that this data can do. When you're an author who has a strong sense of style or voice in your writing, it's gonna look very different from a technical piece of writing that could very well pass all of these metrics for using an active voice or vivid writing or whatever, but this is a novel. I think that also narrows down the scope of what we might consider to be good writing. Like these arbitrary rules of having active voice or having vivid writing with these certain word choices seem to fall under a very westernized lens of what good writing is. Whereas maybe writers from other cultures will have very different writing styles that do not apply to the rules that this program has set up here. So you already have a bias in the way that you've set up your data. Writing a book is incredibly difficult, but it doesn't matter the amount of data analysis that you do. You can only become better by practicing, actually writing a book. Also, the whole idea of vividness is very arbitrary. Using lengthier or more unique, uncommon words doesn't necessarily mean that the writing is more vivid. In fact, there's a lot of great prose out there that uses very simple language, but is still considered good writing or an effective story. If someone from a different culture or has a different dialect happens to use too many adverbs or too many passive sentences, it doesn't mean that their writing is wrong or is less effective. In fact, a lot of great art breaks the rules. The rest of the essay goes on with him talking about how the program that he made works and how he researched copyright laws and thought it would be okay, and the origin story for how Prosecraft was started, but we don't really get him pointing out any wrongdoing or what was wrong or flawed with this, just that he hears people's concerns and he didn't mean to hurt anyone. And I feel like that's not a really good apology because you haven't shown what you actually understand about why people were concerned about this. Instead, most of this energy with writing this essay was focused on intention, which unfortunately doesn't influence the impact. The way that the essay is written positions him to be this very curious, inquisitive person that was simply trying to experiment and try to create something wonderful. But the thing about experimenting is that sometimes you mess up, and when you do mess up, that requires reflection on why that is the case. I don't quite see any kind of reflection in this essay, more just a regurgitation of how this program was started in the first place, and more so his limited point of view rather than anything that he's learned to expand his way of thinking. He doesn't point out the blind spots that he had or the mistakes that he made. He just says that he hears people's concerns and he didn't mean to hurt anyone. There's no apology until way later down, like when you keep scrolling through all the paragraphs and charts and graphs about how the program works. Pretty much about 1,000 words later, after talking about his own product, you can finally get to anything resembling to an apology. So after reading this entire essay, there are still a lot of concerns and unanswered questions. Like, for example, he says, I only ever incorporated books that were published publicly and whose text could easily be found by crawling the internet. But where did you crawl in the corners of the internet? That's the question here. And the authors have pointed this out to him as well. They said, you only use books whose texts were easily discoverable on the internet. That's a lie unless you use pirated copies. What does whose text could easily be found by crawling the internet mean? Because I doubt you bought 25,000 books. So where did you find my entire book on the internet? This isn't an apology, nor do you make clear that you're permanently deleting the data that wasn't yours to use for your little labor of love. This brings up a great point. He doesn't say throughout his essay whether he's deleted the data in the first place. Entire books are usually not uploaded on the internet in legitimate ways, and they're definitely not uploaded for free. And there's no way he bought over 25,000 books. So what is the truth here? And yeah, he may have shut down this website, but what happens to the rest of the data that he still has? He also says, for what it's worth, the Prosecraft website has never generated any income. The Shakespeare desktop app is a labor of love, and during most of his lifetime, I've worked other jobs to pay the bills while trying to get the company off the ground and solve the technical challenges of scaling a startup with limited resources. We've never taken any VC money, and the whole company is a two-person operation just working our hardest to serve our small community of authors. While it is true that Prosecraft is not monetized, maybe because it barely had any kind of life in existing in the first place before it quickly got shut down from people being pissed off at it, something that's worth noting is that his Shakespeare tool does require a paid monthly subscription, and parts of his Shakespeare tool were developed using Prosecraft's crawled database. So that paragraph isn't quite accurate because it's not considering all of these other factors here. And then at the end of his very long statement, instead of him reflecting on his mistakes or why he was wrong or the ethics of of this, he blames the backlash on the rise of AI and how a lot of authors and creatives in general feel very testy with AI becoming a bigger thing in the future. And I can see how he is right about that, even though he's not reflecting on himself internally, because the general sentiment here, if you are a creative or just a person who values art and artists, AI does have kind of a bad reputation. He kind of hints that maybe now was not the right time for Prosecraft to be a thing, which kind of concerns me, because does that mean he thinks it'll be better accepted in the future? To me, it seems like he doesn't understand why it is problematic that AI is encroaching upon art. Because if he were to actually break down the implications of that, he would really see that even though Prosecraft isn't a generative AI, it is still part of the problem. Sure, at the moment, Prosecraft didn't charge any money and it wasn't generative, but that doesn't mean that it could have easily been the stepping stones to create generative AI to produce cheap, easy to make writing. So let's talk about why AI is concerning in the writing world and just in general for any creative. When you have AI appropriate work from artists without compensation, that adds even more to the gap that creatives are facing, where they're creating this work and they're being severely underpaid. Problem right now isn't that AI is replacing all forms of art, because as of right now, AI art in all kinds of forms, whether it's visual art or AI writing, is really shitty. Like, you can easily tell AI art because of their weird fingers or like an abnormal amount of teeth, and you can tell AI writing as well because it's very generic and lazy and doesn't really have any uniqueness or strong voice. It's just a way to cut corners, and because of the limitations of AI currently, you can tell when those corners are being cut. So if you were to compare the quality of AI work compared to the quality of an actual artist or an actual author, it is very easy to tell that the human being that made this art will produce a much better product. But the problem here is that companies will not give a shit about this either way. It doesn't matter that the quality is actually better or that you can easily tell the flaws if you have a trained eye. What matters is that you now have a cheaper product to take advantage of, and you don't have to pay actual human beings to do it. Not only that, even if AI does have limitations, you can still train it to improve itself by stealing other artists' work and doing all of that still without giving any credit to them or paying them. Now these companies can generate huge quantities of content and do it at a much cheaper value without having to worry about that annoying artist that keeps on saying that they have to like pay their rent or need health insurance or whatever. No more listening to all the Pablo speak, you know, it can just be background noise. And there's also the issue of where this data is being scraped in the first place. There's no transparency with it, as you can see by this example right here. And so when you don't have transparency on where exactly you're getting this data from, that makes the bias within the publishing industry even more of a bigger issue. There are tons of examples of AI being used unethically in the writing world, not just in this particular scenario. AI has become a huge thing in self-publishing. On Amazon, there are tons of really low quality AI generated travel guides, children's picture books, and at the expense, that's actually plagiarizing from real travel writers and real children's authors. This year, an author called Friedman wrote a really great blog post titled, "I'd rather see my books get pirated than this." I'll link the blog post in my description, but here she talks about how she realized she was being impersonated on Amazon because someone was selling books under her name and had written it with AI. So not only were they profiting using her name and easy content with AI, this was also being added to her Goodreads profile. So she had to go through this whole process of trying to get the books taken down from Goodreads and Amazon. And that is more frustrating than you would think, because if you have been a Goodreads user, you know that site is janky as hell. She was more successful at getting those fake books off of Goodreads, but with Amazon, that was like a bigger hurdle, because initially Amazon told her that they couldn't actually remove the books under her name unless she had a trademark for her name. So again, this is one of those things where it's like, why do artists have to go out of their way to do this extra labor just so that they won't be stolen from? It wasn't until after her post went viral that Amazon removed the books. But again, why do you have to depend on hopefully other people will see and care about what you're going through and your post goes viral in order for a bigger company to give a shit? Another example is the case of Clarkesworld, which is a renowned literary, sci-fi, and fantasy magazine. They get all their content from submissions of writers who are hoping to make it in the magazine, but they had to shut down submissions when they realized they were being flooded with AI submissions. The creator of this magazine wrote a blog post where he put together a graph showing data from June 2019 to February 2023, and this shows how many monthly submissions that his staff realized was spam. So before this year, spam submissions weren't something that was super common. It was always at the most 25 per month. And in fact, a lot of months didn't have any spam at all. Then when you look at the data, the magazine received more than 500 spam submissions in the month of February alone. And for context, Clarkesworld received around 11,500 submissions in 2022. Can you imagine how frustrating it is that you're just trying to catch a break as a writer and submit to this literary magazine, and now you can't do it because you're competing against hundreds of other titles that were generated by AI that were all very low quality work, to the point where it's taking up too much time and resources for people to properly review the submissions. It's not even a matter that these stories generated by AI are actually good and are seen as like a competition towards real writers, because even Clark himself says that the stories are not even good. And that's the problem with AI in writing. It's not meant to encourage you to think deeply or even to entertain you. All it is just analyzing patterns among a massive sea of data and put out what it thinks is the most desired product based on the quantity of it. It's designed to be predictable, and maybe you can get away with that when it comes to visual art because you're not spending that much time analyzing it. But if you're putting in the time to read a story, you're gonna be able to tell when it sucks or at the very least boring as hell. And lastly, I feel like the most notable example and threat of AI replacing writing is when we look at the TV writers striking right now. It's not even a matter of replacing good quality writing written by humans. It's a matter of how easy it is for companies to continue undermining working conditions and livable wages for these writers. It doesn't matter that people get paid to make things. It only matters if the thing gets made in the first place. And whether that's a human or a shitty AI, they're gonna choose the easiest route. So in conclusion, I think most of us can agree that a lot of AI art sucks ass, and many people who do use AI art and are an advocate for it are clearly not very creative, and you can tell because they get so excited about something, and this is like the closest they can come to creativity by literally copying other people. But it has so many implications. Not only does it cheapen the art, it takes out any kind of nuance and humanity that you put into art, and it reduces it into these very arbitrary, repetitive things. It's not capable of reflecting human experiences, especially when so much of the data is taken in very questionable ways and is very biased. The way that we have approached AI is definitely flawed because the value of AI in the first place was how it could replace repetitive grunt work that nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to do the boring data entry jobs in their 9 to 5. If AI can replace that, then those people might have more time to engage in something they actually care about or make art that they care about. But instead, it's the reverse because AI is now replacing creatives, and I think it's the same thing as doing grunt work when really it requires a lot of innovation, critical thinking, lived experiences, individuality. That is the conclusion of my video. No happy ending here. It just seems like we are on a slippery slope. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about this and where you think AI might go into the future, if you think maybe we'll hit any limitations or if it's gonna get any worse than this. That's all for now. If you made this far, thanks for watching. Go ahead and unsubscribe from my channel, and goodbye. Popping in on top of my table because this is how sturdy it is, to remind you that if you're interested in getting a Flexispot desk, you can use my code with Cindy to get $30 off of select items for orders that are over $500.
But we can make a goal.